Hello, everybody. My name's Kelvin Chin. Today is August 1st. Wow, how'd that happen? August 1st, 2021. And today I'm welcoming you to the discussion, the panel discussion we're going to have today on overcoming anxiety. So let me just kind of start with a little bit of, who I am, because some of you know me, some of you don't. And somebody may be watching this recording on my YouTube channel. We have a live audience here on Zoom with us today, and we have three people who are going to speak about their anxiety stories, how how it manifested for them in various ways. Everybody's unique, everybody's different, of course, and then what their journey was like to get out of that, we'll call it that really high anxiety state, to a state of more balance. We'll call it that, okay? Because really life is about living in a more balanced state. I like that word because it's not, it implies more of like not so many peaks and valleys, ups and downs. We want to take away the roller coaster ride of life. Really, that's to me what living a happier, more contented life is all about. And so we have challenges in life, and everybody does. But the issue is, how can we deal with it so we live a more balanced life and we don't get, pushed around and thrown around like a football, like we often may do in life with the inherent life's challenges. So we're going to talk about that today, and you're going to hear some personal stories from three of my students who I've helped with their anxiety over the years, and how they've overcome their anxiety. We'll have a Q&A with the live folks here at the end, which I'm sure will be interesting for everybody to hear the interaction and so forth. A little bit about myself. So I have been teaching meditation, and I've been helping people with anxiety issues and stress management issues for 48 years now. I learned to meditate when I was 19 years old. I was very, very stressed out, very high anxiety. Some of you may have gone to therapists. Some of you may be therapists and may have referred clients to me. I get a lot of referrals from clients and psychiatrists and so forth. I didn't know what a psychiatrist was when I was 19 years old. I was in college. I didn't know what a therapist, what a counselor was. I mean, I thought a counselor was like a guidance counselor. I was a high school kid, I was just get out of high school. That was what a counselor meant to me. I didn't know anything about mental health help, which, to be quite honest, I needed at that time when I was 19 years old in college. I was desperate. I happened to stumble in to a lecture on meditation, and it turned my life around. That's why I've been teaching for that many years now, helping other people, thousands of people around the world. So I was like many of you, is my point. And I did not learn meditation like some of my students, will learn meditation because they're not high anxiety. Many of my students are high anxiety, have high anxiety issues, but many of them don't. Some of them they want to get healed faster, to get back on the playing field. They're athletes. They want faster reaction time, mind-body coordination. They learn for that reason. I have other students of mine who learn meditation because they want to expand their mind and wake up more of their consciousness and expand their capacity mentally, and or business people just to be more productive. So you can learn for all kinds of reasons, but I learned because I was highly anxious. And it got rid of my anxiety. I overcame my anxiety. That's what we're going to focus on today, because especially in this world today with COVID and everything, and just the inherent challenges of living life wherever you are in the world, we have an international audience live with us here from people in the UK, South Africa, South America, and so forth. And there are cultures and climates, we'll say, cultural climates in the world that are very, very stressed, and they have been for many decades, even long before COVID. So how can we live our lives with less stress, with more ability to cope with the life challenges. That's what we're going to talk about today. So some of you may know I also help people with overcoming the fear of death, death anxiety in particular. So I have a specialty, you could call it, in helping people around the world, 48 countries now, with that particular type of anxiety. And some of our panelists will talk about that specifically today with you. So let me just say a couple things about anxiety in general first. Step back for a second. You know what I did? Right before I Googled anxiety, and I found something on the Mayo Clinic. Some of you who don't live in the United States may not have heard of the Mayo Clinic, but it's a famous healthcare institution in the United States called the Mayo Clinic, M-A-Y-O. And I just happened to see their list of common anxiety signs and symptoms. And I'm sure some of these are going to resonate. You're going to go, oh, well, I've had that happen to me before. But let me just read you the list. Feeling nervous, restless, or tense. Having a sense of impending danger, panic, or doom. Having an increased heart rate. Breathing rapidly, call it hypertension, hyperventilation. Sweating, trembling, feeling weak or tired. Trouble concentrating or thinking about anything other than the present worry, having trouble sleeping, experiencing gastrointestinal GI problems, digestive problems, having difficulty controlling worry, and having the urge to avoid things that trigger anxiety. So that's a list of the Mayo Clinic's symptoms of anxiety, and they probably have, not unfamiliar to, they're probably not unfamiliar to many of you in terms of your own personal experience. I know at least half a dozen of those I had when I was 19, 20 years old. We've heard of the fight or flight response. You've probably heard of this phrase, fight or flight response. It's a term that describes what happens to us neurochemically. Neurochemically means in our brain and our body chemistry when we have an anxiety attack, quite frankly. And the thing is, the fight or flight response, to understand that properly, which I know you've all experienced, we've all experienced it at some point in our lives, it's important to understand that it is not a bad thing. It is a good thing, but it's appropriate only when we're in survival mode. So it's something that's built into the human nervous system. Every human nervous system has the fight or flight response. And that's a good thing when you're in survival mode, when the proverbial saber-toothed tiger is at our door and Walker and I are having dinner in our cave. We just finished 200,000 years ago, and our saber-toothed tiger comes to the door, a saber-tooth, not ours, a saber-toothed tiger comes to the door, and we freak out because we either fight the animal, which we're probably not going to do because it outweighs us by probably about 500 pounds. We're going to run away, fight or flight, run away, flight as in run away. So we run away out the back door of our cave. We climb up a tree. Our heart is racing. The fight or flight has turned on in our body chemistry. That's a good thing. Saves our life. Blood pumps to our big muscles. Heart rate increases. Adrenaline spikes. Glucose, sugar spikes. Very important. Get us energy. Our mind focuses. Our salivary glands. You ever notice when you have an anxiety attack, your mouth goes dry? Why does it do that? Because digestion is not important when you're in survival mode. Okay, your body doesn't care about digestion. It's about getting you out the back of the cave door and up that tree. And Walker and I are up that tree. Now, we're up there for a couple hours, probably. The tiger walks around and finally tiger walks away after an hour, figures we ain't coming down, go someplace else. Well, we hang out up there for another hour just to make sure. And then we figure, okay, we can make it, run back to the cave, block up some big rocks over the back door and the front door of the cave, and then Walker and I pass out. We fall asleep. That's what's supposed to happen when we have the actual real fight or flight response. Then we rejuvenate. on all that extra cortisol and adrenaline and lactic acid goes to our liver and our kidneys. This is what's supposed to happen. It goes to our liver and our kidneys, it gets filtered out and it's excreted out of our body. That's what's supposed to happen so that we're not in this hypertense anxiety state all the time, like many of us are on planet Earth today in 2021. Because now our fight or flight is getting triggered when we're walking across the street and a dog barks at us or something. You know, it's like, well, it's a dog bark. It's not a survival situation. Dog's on a leash, whatever, and it just triggers us, okay? Or where we're in a commuting in traffic and there's a lot of traffic. It's not a survival situation. We're late for an appointment. I get it. But fight or flight is for survival, okay? Now, the good news is that there's an opposite switch. Fight or flight, we all know, is an automatic switch in our nervous system. The good news is that there's an opposite switch, and I call it the opposite of the fight or flight switch. The medical term for it is the parasympathetic switch, the parasympathetic nervous system. So you can Google that later. That's the medical term for the opposite of the fight or flight switch. So that's the key is, how can we turn that on regularly? That's what balances us out. That's what will balance out the anxiety. All right. So we'll hear about that today, but first we're going to hear some stories from folks here and learn how they basically reclaimed that balance in their life. But they're going to take you on a little bit of their journeys that they've gone through in their various lives, the three panelists. So I'm going to open it up to you guys. Brittany, why don't you go first, share with the folks and tell us a little bit about, your journey.
Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Brittany Cook. I am the mother of 4. I currently live in St. Louis, Missouri. I wanted to go back to when I first met Kelvin. I had just come home from a 30-day treatment for severe depression and anxiety in Arizona, and I was feeling pretty good. 30 days in, and I had just been out for a little bit. I felt decent. I felt a lot better than I felt when I went in. But there was definitely still some anxiety I could feel lingering beneath the surface. And I had all these new tools that I was using, trying to, keep myself in the good place. But I definitely felt it there. It was right there. I could feel it wanting to come to the surface. So one night I woke up in the middle of the night with this awful, awful anxiety attack. The type that is so severe that it literally woke me up out of a dead sleep. It blurred my vision. I woke my husband up. I told him what was going on. And, he just kind of talked me through it. And eventually it got to the point where, I calmed, I settled a bit, and I was going to try to go back to sleep. And I picked up my phone, the thing you shouldn't do when you're trying to go back to sleep. And I started Googling anxiety, depression, cures for anxiety, help for anxiety, and meditation, and anxiety came up. So then I Googled meditation and anxiety, and Kelvin came up. So my husband and I called Kelvin the very next day, and we spoke with him the very next day. We did not meditate, but we told him our story, and I will never forget, his exact words were, "Don't worry, Brittany, we're going to get you through this." And that in itself, the sound of his voice, the words that he said already was very soothing for me. I already felt like, okay, this is step 1. We're going in the right direction. I'm going to be in a good place. I had faith that this was going to be different for me. So that being said, I think all of this was just a slow buildup over time. So my childhood, like many others, wasn't that great. A lot of trauma there. And then I had babies pretty, fairly young. I was 20 years old when I had my first baby. And I've said this many times, you hear about all the good things after you have a baby, but rarely, at least for me, did you hear about any of the bad things. So postpartum depression was not something I expected. I think I'd maybe heard of it, but I definitely didn't think it was going to happen to me. And so when it did happen, I was just in an awful place, horrible place, didn't know what was happening, 20 years old, had this new baby, very overwhelmed. And so with that pregnancy, I just kind of waited it out until it went away, until I felt normal again. And then from that day forward, I think anxiety just visited every once in a while, but definitely after each of my babies. So it just gradually got worse. So after I had my second baby, postpartum was much worse. Then I had my third baby, it was worse. My fourth baby, it was at its all-time worst. And I think I just reached for meds every time. And it definitely helped. It got me to a place where I could function and be a mom and be a wife and basically live my normal life. But it clearly wasn't a permanent solution because it was still happening to me. And anxiety and the severe attacks were still like rearing, it was still rearing its ugly head. So when I found meditation, it's just been a game changer for me in that, I'm not claiming, I'm not here to make any claims, but for me, those attacks have not reared their ugly heads the way they used to since I've started meditation. It's been a more permanent solution, I think, for me than anything else that I had tried before. But that's pretty much it. That's my story. If you've suffered with postpartum depression or have had to go, have literally had to hold a child in your arms that you loved so much while you sat in horrible fear over you didn't even know what, it's such a paradox of a feeling. I just felt so lost. Like you feel so much love and so much fear and desperation at the same time. And you literally question, am I ever going to feel normal again? Will I ever feel okay again? And for me, I didn't know this at the time, but the answer was yes. The way I feel today is the best I've ever felt in my life. I feel like a different person to the point where I don't think I've ever been able to say, I like myself, I love myself. I like who I am today. And I think all of this, I think it's all encompassing. It's changed me as a person. But that is my story.
Oh, that's great, Brittany. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, these are very, very intimate, personal things that my panelists are going to share with you guys. And thanks for going there, Brittany. This is a gradual process getting over our anxiety, but one can do it. And I know that some people are listening and they're wondering if it's ever going to be possible because it's so severe at times. And I get it. I've been there, and it's a gradual process, but yes, as Brittany described, we can get over these peak anxiety situations and live our lives in a more contented way. Thanks for sharing that, Jeremy. And we'll come back to Brittany and others when we get to the Q&A. Go ahead, Jeremy.
All right. Yeah, man, a lot of what Brittany said resonated with me. But my story is pretty similar. I had a bumpy road in childhood. Both of my parents were addicts, and there was just constant. My parents were divorced as well, so I had addicts on both sides of my family, and it was just chaos at all times. And when I was 14, was like really my first massive panic attack. For a long time, I felt like I had this like panic attack that just never went away. And it really wasn't until anxiety or until like I started meditating and stuff that I really felt like true relief, which was like more than 20 years later. But as I look back now, I realize there were peaks and valleys in it, but like when you're going through it, it's, and you feel helpless. It's it's much easier to focus on the negativity. So anyways, I had a massive panic attack. I was sitting in a CPR class when I was 14. I was with my mom, but she wasn't much help. My mom had a lot of her own issues, and she didn't have anybody. We didn't really have anybody around us to support us and stuff. So there was no internet back then. There was no, I think there was internet, but it was like AOL, and you got like minutes, and we didn't have money to pay for that. So we didn't have internet. So there was really nowhere to turn. There was nobody in our family or in our life to talk to or anything. So I just completely shut down. And I was a freshman in high school. I dropped out of high school. I literally went from that CPR class into my bedroom and didn't leave my bedroom other than to go to the restroom and shower occasionally for like 10 months. My mom would come home and bring me food and pretty much just cry the whole time. I didn't know what to do or where to turn. If I even tried to go outside or anything, it was just massive, massive fear. And I just always ended up back in my room. And we went down the medication path. We tried to, we didn't have money to see good doctors, but we live in the US, so we got to see doctors, and they threw some medication at me, and it didn't really do anything, but it kind of gave me some hope, which I think was important. I still think that that's the biggest part about anxiety, is getting to a point where you believe that you can get over it. I think we get in this place where we think that there's no chance that we're ever going to get over it. And that just kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I took some medication, and I just kind of powered through it. And I just decided I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in my room. And if nobody was going to help me, I was going to help myself. So the first goal I remember was walking to the mailbox. That was like a goal for like a long period of time. And then the goal was to walk around the apartment complex. And then the goal was to go to the movies with my friends. And then eventually I went back to school, and I just kind of muscled through it. I always dealt with it, but if I kept myself distracted, either by, getting in innocent teenager trouble, or, I never got in a lot of trouble, but we definitely did some dumb stuff. But if, if I could do extreme sports, or, hang out with my friends, or eventually when we got older, drinking beer and stuff like that, if I could keep myself distracted, it always kind of just was low enough that I didn't have to face it. And that went on for a long, long time. I got off medication. Actually, before I went out of my bedroom, I decided to get off medication because it wasn't working. So I flushed it down the toilet. And then I just decided that was the moment where I really took charge at that point in my life and said, if anybody's going to do this, it's going to be me. So then I wasn't on medication until I was like in my early 20s. I moved out of my house when I was 17. So fast forward to like my early 20s, I was kind of trying to figure out my life and my career and those sorts of things. And I had a new job, and I was making a really good living, and I still wasn't happy. So I turned to medication again, tried that for a couple of years, and finally just looked at the pills and said, why am I doing this? I don't think I feel any better than I did when I started. So I went off them again. And then about 5 years later, kind of the same story, had a house, was married. I just still wasn't happy. I didn't really know the difference between anxiety and depression. I just knew that I was dealing with something, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So at that point I was making a really good living, more money than I ever thought I would. And so I tried to kind of buy my way out of it. So I found like what was supposed to be the best doctor in the world, the Amen clinics in Newport Beach. And I paid them a whole lot of money to scan my brain and prescribe specific medication, and basically like the ultimate Western path that you could go down. They sat down with me with my brain scan on this big screen, and I spent days with them, and they explained to me like what parts of my brain weren't working and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, 5 years later, they did the same thing that every other doctor does. They threw shit at the wall and see if it sticks. So they had this beautiful plan of why I was broken with no way to fix me. No way, no more than anybody else had. I would try medication, and when I came back 3 months later and said it didn't work, they would say, okay, try this one. Okay, try this one, try this one, try this one. I don't know that there's, I haven't been on medication in a while, but I don't know that there's a medication out there that I haven't at least tried. luckily I didn't go too far down the benzos and stuff like that, because I know people that have, and it's a scary road. But either way, when I decided that I was done with that path, or actually right before I decided that, they switched me to a medication, and it was an anti-anxiety medication. And I just had a horrible reaction to switching medication. So I was like ramping up on one and like withdrawing from another. And right at that point in time, my mom died. And she died out of the blue. So dealing with that at the same time that my brain was just in chaos mode, I just kind of crumbled mentally. But I had a daughter, I had a wife, we had a house, I had a career, I had a crew of guys that depended on me every day for their livelihood, and going to my room again wasn't an option. So I just was scrambling at work. I was just doing everything I could to get through the day and come home and break down, basically. And at that point in time, my anxiety, at that point in time, I found Kel, but my anxiety had always manifested through a fear of death, or at least that was like the quickest way to like, for my brain to get like really low, really fast. If I thought about death, it was just, that's the end of it. So I believe that we get addicted to anxiety. I know that I did for sure. My body, at least. It sounds kind of weird to say that my brain is addicted to something that I hate, but you get in these patterns where you realize something makes you anxious, and for whatever reason, you just dwell on it until you just work yourself into a frenzy. And death was always the quickest way for my brain and my body to kind of get their anxiety fixed. Sometimes, I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but sometimes you get anxiety because you don't have any anxiety and you just think it's coming, and then there it is. So there was always that kind of vicious cycle, and death was always part of it. So and my mom had just passed away. So it was very much in the front of my mind. So that's how I found Kelvin, through his work with helping people with fear of death and stuff. And it was a slow road for me because I was dealing with the very real, like, physical part of my brain withdrawing from medication. And we didn't do it in the appropriate way. So that kind of was what broke the ties with me with the clinic that I was going to. And I started meditating, and I just believed in the practice, and I believed in myself. And I knew that I had gotten over it every time that it had happened before. And I believed with these new tools that it would be permanent this time. And ultimately it was. That was probably 5 years ago. Now I hesitate to say that I'm anxiety free, because I'm not, but my goal is not to be anxiety free. Anxiety is an appropriate part of our lives, like Kelvin said, when it's an appropriate reaction. Anxiety is terrifying when it happens when you're sitting in the movie theater. If you're getting ready to skydive and you're standing on the edge of a plane, it's completely appropriate, and you actually paid somebody for that experience. I've done a lot of things in my life that most people with anxiety probably wouldn't do. I work in the power line industry. I've worked on helicopters. I've done a lot of stuff where I have these moments of just insane anxiety, but I've kind of always been able to separate when it's appropriate and when it's not, and power through it. And I think that experience at 10 years old in my room, or at 14 for 10 months in my room, just made me really brave with my anxiety. So I've never let it dictate what I do in my life. But until I found meditation, I never had peace in doing those things. So before meditation, I always just powered through, and I did whatever I wanted to do anyways, but I was miserable a lot of the time doing it. Now with meditation and some other, things that I personally do to deal with my anxiety, I have a good relationship with it. If I feel it, I understand it, and I work through it. And when I don't feel it, I'm grateful for the fact that I don't feel it, and I'm aware of it. And meditation is the core of everything that I do with anxiety. So that's my story.
Thank you, Jeremy. So
Thank you.
You're very welcome. You hear the journey that Jeremy and Brittany, and you're going to hear Walker in a minute. And it's it's a painful journey that we're on. I mean, I've been through this too, and it's painful when you're in it. And the issue that Jeremy just wrapped up at the end there is a key point, which is it's about not being overwhelmed by the experience. That's how I articulated in my language, which was what he was saying in his language. It's the same thing. I say the issue is us not being overwhelmed by our experiences. We're not robots. We still live life and we still have challenges in our lives. The issue is, that's what coping means. When they talk about coping, you hear this phrase, oh, you got to cope better. What does that mean? That means that you can handle the challenges. That doesn't mean that you're never confronted with challenges. That doesn't mean that you're a robot and you're not sometimes ill-affected by, look, if people say to me sometimes, Kel, what if somebody very, very close to you died? I'd be crying. I'm sad. I'm not a robot. The issue isn't passivity. The issue is, am I overwhelmed and does it consume me and put me into a state of depression, et cetera, et cetera? So to me, it's the issue of being overwhelmed by our experiences. It's less the experiences themselves. So sadness is an emotion. We experience that. It's normal. But are we paralyzed? So when I say overwhelmed, paralyzed is another synonym, what I mean when I say overwhelmed. Are we paralyzed? Are we consumed by it? Can we still function in a productive way after that experience that we have? That's to me a state of balance. That's what I mean when I say state of balance. And so we're still passionate about things and we're still, in a positive way, and we're still upset by things that upset us. But can we deal with it in a way so that we're not overwhelmed? And this is not a mental manipulation thing too. We'll talk more about this after we hear from Walker, but we're not talking about the power of positive thinking and just walking around thinking, oh, I'm great, I feel great all the time. No, that's just mood. I call that mood making, quite frankly. I mean, I just call a spade a spade. That's a form of mood making. Now, after your mind is stronger and we have woken up more of it and there's more balance in our chemistry, do our thoughts become more powerful? Yes, but that's not how you get there. You don't make your thoughts more powerful by saying, I'm not anxious, I'm not anxious, I'm not anxious, I'm not anxious, when you're anxious. That does not get rid of your anxiety. And I'm sure those of you who have had anxiety issues of any degree in your life have tried that, and it doesn't work. What happens? It makes it come back even stronger. Resisting and pushing away something that's happening just makes it come back stronger. So that's not the technique that we're talking about here. We'll talk a little bit more about the technique later in our discussion, but I just wanted to, but thank you for that. The key thing that Jeremy said is now he has peace. That's the thing. It's peace within a world in which challenges exist. That's the state of being to me. It's not this, you read some meditation books and they paint this picture and it's like, oh, everything's bliss and and they paint this kind of utopian world. Last I checked, we don't live in a utopian world, okay? And nobody individually has a utopian world that they live in their own little mini universe either. We'll always have challenges. The issue is, how do we navigate that in a way where we can still have peace within that, to use Jeremy's word. Thank you for that. Walker?
Hi, everybody. My name is Walker, and my anxiety has been a curse and a blessing. Speaking of not turning into a robot or not wanting to turn into a robot, that's sort of a priority for me, to constantly be feeling things deeply because of what I do. I'm a producer, I'm an actor, I'm a storyteller, and anxiety has been a theme throughout my life. And, I always thought of it as a really terrible thing until, I would say maybe the last 5 to 10 years when I realized that part of my purpose is I've discovered, is to tell the stories of what I have survived. So I think I am genetically predisposed to anxiety and depression, mental illness in general. And I have come up against some enormous obstacles, as many of us have, as Jeremy has, and Brittany has as well. And, yeah, so, that is why I wouldn't change a thing. And I always like to say that because, um, my struggles have allowed me to connect with others. And that's been a real silver lining. And it's led me here in a way. It led me to meeting Kelvin and discovering the tools to like meditation that have made my life not overwhelmed by anxiety. So I struggled with anxiety and depression from the time I was 10. And things culminated in my 20s with a pretty major nervous breakdown when I had just taken a job as a lead singer on a cruise line, and I had no business whatsoever getting on a boat of any kind. I was way too mentally unstable to be at sea. And I ended up a couple of months later in a hospital. So look, it was very traumatic, but looking back on it makes a great story. So, excuse me. So anyway, if I had to identify the cause of my anxiety, I would say a floundering sense of self, really constantly doubting myself, feeling like I'm not good enough, wondering if I will ever be good enough. So that was one major cause. And then I was also majorly, for most of my life until my 30s, majorly over-medicated. And so the way that it manifested was feelings of impending danger. I was listening to Kel read the symptoms, and I was like, yep, check, check, check. Feeling of impending danger, fight or flight, feeling scared all of the time, very easily triggered into sort of unraveling stress-wise, and just kind of living in this high octane, high stress place all the time, where I felt like I couldn't breathe, and eventually developed some gastrointestinal issues. So I would say that until 30, I thought medication was the answer. And all along, it was just making things worse. Of course, I didn't know that then, but the scenario would be get anxious, reach for a pill, and then not be anxious. And then the next day, get up, maybe feel like, okay, and maybe not anxious today, but I always in the back of my mind was, what if I get anxious? I better have those drugs on me. So it's like, even on days I wasn't anxious, because of the medication, because it was outside of me, this external solution that wasn't a solution, there was always this sort of background hum of anxiety about my anxiety. And it just created this cycle of dependency that it compounded the anxiety problem. It really, meds are a double-edged sword in that way, because they're a temporary solution and they don't help long-term, because it's, you can't, they're outside of you. And that's really, I found that to be, I was really happy to discover that was disempowering, that it made the anxiety worse. And once I started coming off of all the medication, one thing at a time, I realized, wow, the less medication I'm on, in a way, the less anxious I am, because I'm building trust that I can manage these issues myself. And the more confidence I had that I could manage these issues myself, then the more I was able to, the less anxious I was. It just sort of created this self-fulfilling prophecy. So that was all well and good, and that was all kind of enough for me. And I was living day to day, not of course I would get anxious, but I became less and less overwhelmed by my anxiety, and I was rarely paralyzed by my anxiety until um, my latest kind of crisis story, which was cancer. When I was 37, I'm now 42. When I was 37, I got a cancer diagnosis, and I had major surgery, which was probably the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me physically. I had my liver removed, 3/4 of my liver removed. And obviously, here I am. I survived it. I survived the surgery. I'm cancer free. But that was really just the beginning, not the end. As if any of you have been through any kind of major illness, life-threatening illness, you know that, being in remission is just, in a way, just the beginning, because then you have to deal with all the trauma and the fear of recurrence. That is what led me to Kelvin, because I was, it was like 3 a.m. and I was freaking out. And I Googled managing fear of death or something like that, and I found his website. And it was interesting. What I noticed was that the anxiety about my illness, or my fear that it would recur, was different than the anxiety that I had when I was younger. The anxiety I had when I was younger was kind of manic craziness. This anxiety was depressive, and it was almost like, and maybe Kel could speak to this later, but I felt constantly weak and tired and physically unwell, and it almost felt like I wasn't. There was no fight or flight, but there was definitely a freeze. There was a shutdown. It was almost like I was playing dead. I couldn't handle it, and my body and mind shut down. And I remember my partner Evan saying to me, "This is, I've never seen you like this. This has gotten really, really bad." And that was the moment that I realized I have to, I need to learn to manage this somehow. And I thought, I should probably maybe call this guy Kel, because he teaches meditation. And I had done a lot of meditating before, but never, I never did so with any consistency. And so I found that, just wrap up my talk by saying that what changed when I started working with Kelvin and started meditating was that I had this confidence that I had these tools. I knew I had this tool in my back pocket that, okay, maybe I'll get anxious later today, or maybe I'll be anxious tomorrow, but I have this thing now internally that I can use to manage the problem. That in and of itself made me less anxious. Knowing that I had this thing that was actually changing my brain, even though I couldn't maybe feel it and I knew that it was a long-term thing, that the changes happen in your brain slowly. I knew that I was doing good for my brain. That in and of itself made me less anxious. And the idea of death became somehow less of a big deal. I think this whole depression anxiety, was the root of that was a fear, deep fear of death. I was so afraid that there was something going on inside my body that I wasn't aware of, that I was dying and no one knew it. That the cancer had come back, and every little pain and every little twinge I felt in my abdomen, it was this, oh my God, there's a blockage, there's another tumor. And dealing with that was just, it was a really scary, scary way to live. And I kept imagining my own death. I kept saying to myself over and over, I don't want to die young. I don't want to be one of those people that, there are all these people that die young. I don't want to be one of those people that dies young. So it was a lot. And I found that when maybe 3 to 4 weeks after I started meditating, the whole idea, it wasn't that death became less of a big deal, or I was like, I don't care if I die. It wasn't that. It was that anything that was ultimately outside of my control, I stopped obsessing about, because I kind of all of a sudden one day realized, oh my God, what can I do about it? You know, I can only do what I can do about it. I can take care of myself physically. I can take care of my health. I can meditate, get a good night's sleep, exercise, try to eat well, try to deal with my chocolate addiction. And then, you know, that, what can I do about it? I can sit here and freak out all day. If there's only, I can't do anything about it. And it became almost this humorous thing, this kind of lighthearted thing where I was like, what can I do about it? Still went to the doctor, still did all the things I was supposed to do. And I was so amazed by how easy this particular meditation was, because I had done a lot of meditation and I found this to be easier than anything I'd ever done. It was more, and that was the goal of it, was to be easy. And it's still a process today, sort of moving away the obstacles that I am putting in my way, even when I meditate. This sort of wanting to do it right, wanting to do it perfectly, and remembering that the goal is not perfection. It's about letting go of all of that. Has made it such a pleasant experience, and has just given me so much ease. So anyway, that's my story. Sorry I went over my time limit, but that's my story.
Yeah, no time limit. That's great. Thank you, Walker. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we'll talk about the meditation technique in a second, but before we get there, I mean, we'll talk about how easy it is what I teach and how different it is what I teach from, 99% of the meditation techniques out there. So much easier. But I wanted to mention a couple of things that Walker, I take notes when each of you guys talk, and I just wanted to kind of revisit some of your key points. And you asked me to make a comment about that weakness and tiredness and your freeze response. So we'll talk about that first, and then there's no particular order I need to cover these points in that you mentioned. Constantly weak and tired, you said. That was the phrase that you used. And in your younger years, you were more kind of hyper anxious, and then it was more depressive when you got this the cancer diagnosis and your surgery with your liver, 3/4 of your liver removed and so forth, and all of that. It was more of a freeze. So you can have, with the fight or flight, there is a freeze response too. And I know people, and I have clients, I have students of mine who've had a freeze response. So it's still fight or flight, but it's fight or flight or freeze. I mean, they don't call it that, but it's still related to that chemical reaction. But the freeze part also, when you're starting to feel what you experience, when you talk about constantly weak and tired, that's adrenal. That's adrenal glands. That's adrenal overload, they call that. Adrenal exhaustion. Your adrenal glands are really, really tired. And that happens and I've helped family members, I've helped some very close people to me personally deal with adrenal overload. And I got adrenal overload almost, just from helping the person. So you have to be careful. And as a helper, I'm speaking to myself, as a helper, you got to be careful of taking care of yourselves, ourselves when we're helping others. But adrenal fatigue is very, very common. And that's excessive turning on of the fight or flight. So when you were younger and your fight or flight's turning on, you're kind of more hyper, and it kind of fits with the fight or flight, nomenclature. You're still exhausting your adrenals, and eventually you get to a point of adrenal overload, and that's when you just feel weak and tired. You just can't move, And so many people who've gone through anxiety and depression issues know what I'm talking about. You get to that stage, adrenal fatigue. Adrenal glands need to rest. When the adrenal glands are not resting regularly every night, during our good night's sleep, they start triggering, and they secrete the hormone adrenaline. Most people know what that is. You know, that gets your heart going faster and everything and all that. They start secreting adrenaline at 2 in the morning, at 3 in the morning, at 4. It's not supposed to be happening then. That's when the adrenal glands, they get confused, basically, is in a layperson's language, the way I describe it. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychotherapist, but I know a lot about this stuff because I've been helping people with it for 40, 50 years now. But the adrenal glands get confused, basically, and they start secreting adrenaline when they shouldn't. That's what happens when they get really, really exhausted. You see, the adrenal glands are supposed to shut down, and we're supposed to sleep based on the circadian rhythms of sleeping. I have a lot of clients who just have sleep problems. So circadian rhythms is based on when the sun rises, when the sun sets, when it's dark, and so forth. So there's a natural shutting down of our nervous system to sleep and rest. In the Northern Hemisphere, where we live in our latitude, it's around 10:30, 11:30 at night, we should be going to sleep so our adrenal glands can rest. But when our fight or flight response is kicked on too much, like yours was, Walker, when you were younger and all those decades and so forth, the adrenal glands, as I said, get confused and they start kicking it out when it shouldn't be. But freeze is a response, also a side effect response of the fight or flight as well. Just people like freeze, that's what he's talking about, freeze. He's not talking about feeling cold. He's talking about mentally freezing up and everything kind of shuts down mentally, emotionally, okay? But that's why that happened to you. But the key, what did he talk about? Walker talked about at the beginning, you heard him talk about how the drugs were providing an external solution to him. He used the word external. That's the key word there. External solution, whereas the meditation is an internal solution. And that's a key distinction, because that's what breeds the inner confidence. Because I have this phrase I use in my classes. I say, we got to work on ourselves from the inside out. It's not the outside in, it's the inside out approach. That should be the approach to life. We need to strengthen ourselves from the inside out. Then, yes, we can do things on the outside to continue to strengthen ourselves, and we should be doing it jointly. But if we're not going inside, at least some of the day, to strengthen ourselves, then the external stuff, it's just, we don't have a foundation. We have to build a foundation inside. So the external stuff that we're doing to help strengthen ourselves, the workshops we're taking, the books we're reading, the classes we're taking, all of that can work better if we have a deeper foundation, a broader foundation, a deeper and broader foundation within ourselves. That's where the meditation fits in. So I'm not a Pollyanna guy, if you know what that means. I'm not saying meditation is the only thing you need to do in life and in your life will be perfect. No, we have to do a combination of a lot of things. But if we're missing the meditation, if we're missing the internal component, then we're missing a key component, and that's the thing. That's the thing. It's all about balance, including inner and outer balance. And the other thing that I want to end this part, and we'll open it up to Q&A, and you guys can ask our panelists more questions and so forth. And then later I'll talk about the meditation technique, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk to them first. Is this control what we can control issue and let go of what we cannot control. I've been saying that for at least 2,000 years. I'm aware of that. I've been teaching. Control what we can control and let go of the stuff we cannot control. That's really, it sounds so simple, right? But when when we feel out of control, then we start trying to control stuff that we cannot control. And then that frustrates us, and it makes us try to control it even more, which makes it worse, especially with our anxiety. As we said earlier, we cannot control the anxiety and make it go away without dealing with our internal. That's the thing. And so therapy is helpful. I'm not saying not to go to your psychotherapist. I get a lot of referrals from psychotherapists, but working in conjunction with the therapy, the meditation together, that's where you really get the most out of the therapy. But you know, that the obsessing, the last thing I want to talk about that Walker mentioned was, he said he's no longer obsessing over this stuff. And that no longer obsessing comes from what? That comes from, and where does this control stuff that we can control and allow the other stuff that we can't control, where does that ability come from? That comes from balancing our chemistry that we're talking about in a natural way through the meditation, but also expanding the conscious capacity of the mind outside of what I sometimes refer to as the little 8-inch plastic bucket. For those of you in the metric world out there in cultures, you know, centimeters, you know, like 16-centimeter bucket, you know, that's what the psychology professor whose analogy I've borrowed for decades now said. Most people incorrectly think that's their mind. No, your mind is much bigger than that. You just don't know it. You haven't turned on the light switches in the rest of your mind. That's what the technique I teach my students does. It turns on the light switches in the rest of your mind. That's when you can start to discern better what can you control and what can you let go of. That's when your obsession of stuff, obsessive behavior, starts to dissipate, because when our mind thinks it's very, very limited, we start obsessing over stuff because there's only a certain amount of stuff we can control. We can only move around the thoughts in that limited mind in a certain way. When we expand, whether you think about it as brain cells or whether you think about it more abstractly in terms of consciousness, the analogy works from the psychology professor the same way. When we can expand our capacity, our mental capacity, which the meditation naturally does, you feel freer. And when you feel freer, you don't feel the need to control and obsess over stuff you can't control. All right, so let's open it up to our audience here, our live audience. Questions anybody has, and if you're shy, you can leave it in the in the chat box if you want. But feel free to take yourself off of your mics, off of mute.
Oh, can I share something?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jeremy. Yeah.
So a couple things. One thing you said just that I try to remind myself of is I read a study one time, and they said that like when you're in like a chronic stress or like a panic state, like the frontal lobe in your brain shuts off and you literally have 50% of the IQ that you normally do. And I think part of what you're talking about with like expanding is just being at full capacity, right? Like it's when you still to this day, I'll get in a stressed state and I'll be talking what I look back at it and I'm like, it's freaking nonsense, right? Like it's so like the thinking is so limited. Like I still put myself in stressful situations with business or whatever it is in life. And I'm talking to my wife about things. And when I look back on it, I'm like, I don't even believe any of that stuff. But my IQ was like so low in that moment that it's all I could come up with. And I'm just struggling to control. Right. So I just wanted to share that. But Christina had put something in the chat that really spoke to me. And she said, now that I've been working with Kelvin for months, I have moments of peace. And a big thing that changed for me, and thank you for sharing that, Christina, and everybody that commented on that as well. But one of the big things that changed for me, Kelvin said, you know, you have to get to a place where you're at peace and use meditation and that sort of thing. And then you can start focusing on positivity and stuff like that. And I agree with that. With going back to what I said about the IQ thing, you have to get to a point where you're operating at mental capacity that you can start to utilize other tools. And for me, focusing on the positive things in my life and gratitude, I would say is second to meditation. And the wording of what you said really struck me because I had always looked at myself from the time I was 14 till just a couple of years ago as somebody who had anxiety and depression. I based my identity around having anxiety and depression. I'm an anxious person and I have moments of calm. But if I look back at it, those moments of anxiety are just so powerful that they seem to be all that you think about. If you took a piece of paper and you wrote down every minute of your day, like realistically, is more of it spent in anxiety Or is it just that those moments are so powerful that's all you think about? So what I do in my mind is, now I tell myself that I'm a happy person and I have moments of anxiety. And for me, it's such a more empowering place to look at myself from and to think about that. And if I have to meditate more often to get that, just to get that to turn from to 51% anxiety and 49 not, to 49 and 51. Now I'm a person that I'm a happy person because I'm happy more often than I'm not. And I have moments of anxiety. And it's so much more healthy for me to look at life that way than to look at life as I'm a depressed and anxious person that has moments of happiness. And that's a choice that I make with myself regularly internally. So I don't, Christina, I don't know if that helped you at all or not, but I just wanted to share that because it was a huge realization for me, just how I frame my life. At the end of the day, if you have a bad day, the person that graded that day is you. You know, when I have a bad day, I'm the one that decided that. Nobody came in and said like, hey, you know, we graded your day today and it's unfortunately it was bad. So for me, just like kind of reminding myself that I am a happy person. I do have fun. I do get silly with my daughter and, you know, do good things for other people and stuff like that. And just, I'm a happy person that has bad moments. It's powerful for me. So
I think that's a great point that Jeremy's making. I want to underscore what he's saying here in this way, because I think we incorrectly, and I'm talking about not just us here who have been through anxiety and issues and so forth. I'm talking about the world now. I'm talking about 8 billion people. Okay, I think we incorrectly have perfection as a standard. It's like a yardstick that exists. And whether it's, I don't know, on the Olympics, I was watching the Olympics last night, whether it's doing a vault or whether it's, doing this or that or whatever. Yeah, we live in a world that is built around this idea of perfection and win-loss, black and white. And life really doesn't reside that way. That's not where life resides. We know that from daily experience. It's more like what Jeremy's describing. That's real life, okay? Okay, you can take a moment and you play in the Super Bowl and if you're Tom Brady or whatever, and I get it, okay? There's a win. I'm not saying there's not situations where there's a win-loss, but I'm saying do not extrapolate from that's how your life should be. Do not measure. Do not use that as a metric to measure our lives. So Jeremy's example, I think, is instructive. That he used like 49%, 51%, whatever. How's my day today? Was it 51% good and 49% it kind of sucked or whatever? It's like, okay, great. That was better than the other day where I had, it was 25 and 70, whatever the math is, 75% sucked or whatever. To me, it's more about, it's relative, and it's about how can we move the needle more towards the positive side of the 50, 51, 55, 60%, as opposed to holding ourselves to a standard of 100%. Which is really unrealistic. It's really unrealistic.
I think it's also really important. You said it earlier, to understand that the goal is not 100% perfection. Like, yes. One of my mentors said to me, he said, the absence of sadness is not happiness. Like, the absence of sadness does not equal happiness. So sadness is an important part of our lives. Anxiety is an important part of our lives. If you're happy all day, every day, and every day is 100, then that's now average, right? So in order to have highs, you have to have lows. So it's just getting to a point in your mind through meditation and other, whatever you do that helps you, to get to a point where you say, okay, I'm sad right now. That doesn't mean that I'm depressed and I need to go get help. It means something's going on inside of me and I need to deal with it so that I can get back to normal, so that I can experience joy.
Yeah, exactly. Let me give you a physical example of what we're talking about to maybe to underscore what Jeremy's saying. It's a very good point. I'll give you a physical example, and I want to give you a physical example because sometimes we talking so much about these emotional things that if we're in the middle of anxiety stuff, it's like a little too close and we can't really get it. But here's a physical example. My body, so because what Jeremy is really describing, let me describe the principle that he's talking about, is we can all get to a place where we are more sensitive emotionally. To Walker's point about not being a robot, we can get to a place through meditating and eating well and hydrating and exercising and doing everything else that we need to do in a balanced way in our life. We can get to a place where we are more sensitive to our emotions and our mental experiences. And key word that Jeremy is kind of touching on is our needs, because these are flags. These are flags. And sometimes it might be an orange flag. Sometimes it might be a red flag to pay attention. Okay, we've got to pay attention. Okay, so those are not, our thoughts and emotions are not bad. This is a thing that's out there in a lot of spiritual groups and so forth, and they make it sound like it's bad. No, these are all part of who we are, of our experience, and they are telling us stuff about ourselves. So here's the physical example I want to share with you guys. So I don't know when the last time I've gotten what most people would refer to as physically sick is. It's been many decades. The last time I know that I had the flu, and I've never gotten flu shots, vaccines or whatever, flu vaccines. The last time I know is 1985, because I know I was lying on my friend's floor and we were watching this movie Splash, and I don't remember what it was, but other than Daryl Hannah was in it, and it's something to do with water. And I was sick. I had a fever. Okay, that's the last time. But have I ever gotten signals, but since 1985 to present, that I might be needing to pay attention, as to Jeremy's point, but in my case, physically, to some, yes. So sometimes I'll feel a little tired. I'll feel a little like, oh, my mind isn't as clear. I'm gonna notice it mentally first sometimes, and then physically I'll notice, oh, so I'll take a nap. I listen to my body. That's what Jeremy's saying. Listen to ourselves. So physically, the physical example is I'll take a nap, 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour if I'm really feeling tired, and then the symptom goes away. These mental things that Jeremy is pointing out also are symptoms. They're not, to use his phrase, who we are. That's not who I am, he said. I am not an anxious person. I am a person having anxious moments, having some anxiety now. It doesn't define who we are. Now, I get it. If you're in the middle of the soup, I call it, I understand it's difficult to discern. I've been there, okay? But the meditation is the key component to help us start to release ourselves, and to use the phrase that Walker has heard me use many times, that Walker used, letting go, so that we can expand our capacity for experience and then have the perspectives that Jeremy's talking about. To his point about the frontal lobe shutting off, I have a study, a link to a study. It's not my study. It's a link to a study. It's on my website. By the way, the website is turningwithin.org, turningwithin.org, or you can just Google my name. If those of you who don't know how to reach me, just Google my name and look. You can look. I have 4 websites, but the point is that on my turningwithin.org meditation website, I have a link there to a study that talks about the hippocampus, which is the frontal lobe of the brain. That's the medical term for it. It's called the hippocampus, and how meditation increases production of brain cells in the hippocampus part of the brain. And specifically the type of meditation that I teach. They don't specifically talk about me and the meditation that I teach, but they describe a non-focusing, non-controlling process, okay? That's because focus and control does not create. So all of you who've done focus and controlling meditation, it's not create, according to this study, I think it was done in Finland or something. The Americans tend to not do the, because we're so, as you've heard our panelists talk about, our healthcare system is so, embedded with the, ensconced with the whole, pharmaceutical approach, these studies that alternative approaches of meditation and how it affects the hippocampus and all that tend to be done in Europe, but producing more brain cells. The hippocampus is that frontal lobe that has to do with emotional balance, learning ability, and memory. Probably has to do with other things, but those are the three things that were cited in the study. Learning ability, emotional balance, and memory. The hippocampus, creating more brain cells in this, the way I teach this meditation technique in that part of the brain that Jeremy was just referencing. Walker or Brittany, do you have anything else before we go to the Q&A? Do you have anything else?
Yeah, just one quick thing to add on to all of that. So one of my clients is a psychoanalyst, and she talks about how CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't work if you don't already have access to the prefrontal cortex. It's like if you don't she uses the term, if you don't have mind, if you can't think, if you can't think straight, then it's not going to work for somebody to tell you, well, why don't you think about it this way? Because you can't receive it. Like Jeremy said, it's like only part of your brain is working. So it's almost like, I mean, in her case, she was talking about, how psychoanalysis can sometimes be that bottom up approach. But I think in this scenario, it also applies that meditation is like this bottom up. This meditation is like this bottom up approach. You're laying the foundation. Lisa just said in the comments, as I've gotten older, my fear of death has greatly increased, not being dead per se, but the dying part and that of the ones I love. Help. And it's like, I so get that, what it's like to be in that place where you're like, help me. And I guess that's what we're talking about, is like, you can, if you don't do that sort of foundational work, and you're not thinking straight, you don't have access to this part of the brain in the front, then it's hard to even entertain another perspective. It's hard to even consider letting go of what we can't control. It's like not possible. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, Lisa contacted me recently, so we're going to be working together and helping her with this. So yeah, that's great. Good. Brittany, anything else?
I think the only thing I just wanted to add was, I kind of glossed over my story because I could get into the details of everything, but those are, we could go down all these other roads if I got into the details. I said there was some childhood trauma. I had a dream last night about my childhood trauma randomly. I'm 35 years old. These things don't leave you. There was physical, there was emotional. My postpartum depression was so severe that when I heard stories about women who ended their lives or hurt others in the same position, I never thought I could do it, but I understood why. And it's not that I understood it in an excusable way. I just knew where they were in that place that they made that decision. And around the same time I contacted Kelvin, I called one of my best friends and told her it's happening again, it's peaking again. And she didn't say, okay, I hope this works. I hope that you find something that works and things are perfect. She said, I want you to be at peace. And I think that's the thing. That's the place I've come to. And peace has allowed me to experience all of the other more positive emotions so much more frequently and so much more genuinely.
That's great. No, that's the key phrase. I like that phrase, being at peace or contentment. You will hear me sometimes use the word happiness because that's the phrase that they know that word, okay? But I will usually quickly define what I mean by happiness as being at peace inside and feeling a sense of contentment. Because as Jeremy said, the problem with just talking about happiness or even worse, in many meditation circles, they talk about bliss, which is like a peak experience of happiness. Well, you cannot, by definition, you cannot have an experience of bliss. You can't know what it is without having had an experience of the opposite. So who wants a life like this, up and down? I call it the roller coaster. That's not a life of inner peace and contentment to me. And it's not flat. So that it's not one or the other. It's not black and white, you know, oh, you get this one or that one. No. I tell my high anxiety students, you're in the middle of 150-foot waves right now, your ocean. You have tidal waves of emotion going on right now. I get it. I've been there. I'll help you get to a place, you know, you got to do this, but I'll help you get to a place where you're like 2, 3, 4, 5 foot, 6 foot swells. You know, it's not that we don't have emotions, but we're not overwhelmed by the tidal wave. That's the thing. Okay. So we're still feeling deeply. And even that analogy, the tidal wave analogy, is not accurate, because I have tidal waves of emotion now, but I have 150-foot waves now that don't overwhelm me. That's the difference, okay? Because when we still look at this in a linear way, which the initial tidal wave analogy is kind of more linear, is what I'm saying, it's more linear. It's not accurate, because what I teach in this very easy way is, those of you who taken my class know, no focusing, no controlling the mind, no concentration, no clearing the mind of thoughts, none of that. And some of you who've never taken my class going, well, wait a minute, that's all they taught us to do in all the classes I took. Some variation of that. No, and it's not a guided meditation. It doesn't matter if you're thinking peaceful thoughts. What happens is an expansion of that out of that 8-inch plastic bucket. But the other part of that 8-inch plastic bucket analogy that's still linear, that doesn't describe that, is really what I'm teaching expands the 8-inch plastic bucket also. So now your conscious thinking part of your mind that Jeremy and Walker were just talking about, so forth, Walker was talking about in terms of his other therapist person saying this, a related point. When you expand the 8-inch bucket now, you're not just expanding outside the 8-inch plastic bucket. That's what this technique that I teach does. We turn on more of the light switches on than the rest of our mind. But we're also expanding the 8-inch bucket. That's also going on at the same time. There's multiple stuff going on at the same time. And it's not because you're thinking about a bucket. That's not the technique. You guys will laugh who've taken the class. You know what I mean? That's not the technique. It's just an analogy that kind of describes somewhat what happens. Because after you've been doing this technique and you get in consistently 10 to 15 minutes each time, twice a day, you don't have to do it a half an hour, or 2 hours like you've probably been taught in some of these other meditation classes. 10 to 15 minutes twice a day, but the consistency is important, because the consistency, you're training your nervous system to turn on that parasympathetic, that opposite of the fight or flight switch, regularly. So I do not encourage my students to use it only when they're anxious, because then it's like a Band-Aid approach. No, you want to do it preventively so that you continue to expand the mind way outside the 8-inch plastic bucket and expand the bucket itself. So now the bucket is no longer 8 inches big. It's now 800 feet big, the 8-inch plastic bucket, whatever, you know, and you're still expanding the mind outside of that 800-foot bucket now, whatever. And you're balancing the chemistry, consistently balancing the chemistry, because look, think about it this way. If sleeping and dreaming were enough, nobody'd be stressed out. If sleeping and dreaming, it's not, and everybody's stressed out. 8 billion people are walking around in various degrees of being stressed out on planet Earth. Sleeping and dreaming is not enough. You gotta, turning on the parasympathetic and letting go, as Walker said, he was quoting me in my class, I say 1 million times, it's about letting go. letting go and allowing our mind to expand its capacity, and letting go of our baggage, letting go of the old patterns and so forth. However you want to articulate that, that's what this is about. Okay, that's what brings this all these positive effects around into our lives. So what do we got? Let's see. Yeah. And people are talking about loving oneself in the chat box here. You can't just love yourself by saying that you love yourself. You're using it by using an 8-inch bucket part of ourselves to love ourselves versus an 800,000 foot big container of our mind to loving ourselves. It's just a huge difference. That's where the rubber meets the road. There's so many, you'll see these posts on Instagram, on Facebook, and people post these quotes from some guru or this or that, love oneself and blah, blah, blah. I get it. I can come up with those same quotes, but the thing is the how. That's a description of point B. That's where we all want to be. Everybody's at point A. How do you get from point A to B? That's where the rubber meets the road. That's the key. That's the key missing link. That's where the meditation comes in. That we got to go inside, and that's the missing part. By just reading or reading more aphorisms. That's an aphorism. It's like a nice phrase, and it makes us feel good. It's not nothing. I'm not saying put aphorisms out there that are negative. It's good to read positive aphorisms, but like Jeremy said, if we're only reading that with a small part of our frontal cortex of the hippocampus at any given moment, it's going to have a very small effect on us. So what can we do to expand our capacity? That's the key. Okay. All right. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions, live questions from folks? Want to ask questions? Anybody? I'm going to put on gallery here. Anybody who's on want to ask any questions? Questions.
We talked the last class, and Christina had asked another question about when did we notice our thought patterns change?
Yeah.
And somebody in the last class asked, like, when did the fear of death go away? I don't know if that's something we want to go through as a panel again, but I would like to hear.
So why don't you guys go through, take
everybody's thoughts again on it?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just because, like, for me, it was what I said in the last one was, and I think it applies for death and also for just your thought patterns in general, is you don't really realize when it happens because what you're doing is letting go of control. So letting go of control means that you're also not monitoring and paying attention to your mood at every point in time. For me, I think a lot of really intelligent people have anxiety issues. Most people that I know that have anxiety issues are also really intelligent people. And they think about things a lot deeper and a lot more than other people do. And you get caught in a line of thinking where you have to understand and control everything. And I know for me, my fear of death, when I ultimately boil it down, is not so much about death. It's about not being in control, not existing, therefore not controlling. And even to this day, when I have stress that manifests in other ways that's not death, I can almost always boil it down to control. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I can't prove it, but to me, I even see, everybody on this call, when you mention the word control, they're like, yes, like, because you realize it's such a big part of where the anxiety comes from. For me, I think if I think about every time I'm anxious, I could probably honestly boil it down to that. So when you learn to just be in the moment and you learn to let go is the biggest word in my life right now. Every time I feel anxiety right now to this day, I just journaled about it last night. I said, from now on, my affirmation is that the feeling of anxiety is a trigger for me to realize that there's something I need to let go of. And I'm going to think about that and I'm going to let it go. And it's not going to go away instantly. I'm not going to let go and then all of a sudden be like, whoo, that's gone. I don't ever have to think about that again. But it's that cumulative effect of letting go over and over and over until your brain says, okay, when I go to that thought, I don't get anxiety, which is what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to stop going there. And then it's a process. So it's not the Western idea of you put a pill in your mouth and you count to 30 and you go, ah. It's developing the tools and the mentality to deal with everything that life throws at you. Not to be absent of any emotion, but to be able to deal with it. So I think that it's hard to pinpoint, for me at least, like when in meditation things get better. Even if I'm at like a higher point of anxiety in my life now, and I realize I'm not doing the things I need to do, or like I'm not perfect with my meditation. There's times where I fall off a little bit, or life gets in the way, and I realize that I need to love myself enough to get back into the practice. And when I do, I feel better, but I'm not monitoring like day 4 was perfect. It's doing the things I need to do to take care of myself and not worrying so much about, and I know it's hard to do when you're in that moment. You're like, I just want relief now. But you just have to trust in the process and do the work that you need to do and let it come naturally.
Well, the other point on that is that we need to the last point that Jeremy made is that we need to get away from culturally this thinking. It's a pill. We live in a pill culture. I call it. I've written an essay in my new book. There's a chapter 4 in my new book is on meditation. There's about 12 essays on meditation out of the 67 essays in this book. I wrote an essay on drive-through meditation. Drive-through meditation is the title of the. People want drive-through everything. They want like, okay, I want my coffee fast. I want my food fast. I want my healthcare fast. I want my health back fast. I want my anxiety gone fast. And so meditation is not a sledgehammer approach that the psychotropic drugs are that our panelists talked about. That's the sledgehammer approach that our culture is used to. Sledgehammer it. And then of course, you've heard them talk about how they feel when you get sledgehammered, so by the drugs. So, we need to remember that the meditation is a different approach. It is not a sledgehammer approach. And therefore, it's gradual. It comes, the patterns I see over and over again, and we'll hear what Brittany and Walker talk about this as well in a sec. But the patterns I see is that it comes and goes. It doesn't go away overnight, your anxiety. It comes and goes. But the example I give my students, because I've heard this so many times, it's like a rheostat, a dimmer switch on a light switch. It's like the intensity becomes less and less, and the frequency becomes less and less over time. And eventually, I'll let you guys speak to this point, because you've told me this privately, you don't know when it went away. You just don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. You're not noticing it. You're not keeping it like, oh, is it, because if you're like that, then it's like Jeremy's talked about earlier. It's like, then you're anxious about your anxiety. Well, that doesn't make sense, but you don't know what you don't know. That's the thing. So let me, one last point before I want to go to Brittany and Walker on this, which is the control issue. The control issue is a normal, natural response when we feel out of control. All right. And it's easy to say to control stuff we can control and let go of what you can't. But why do people start to feel more at peace after you've been doing this simple meditation technique twice a day, 10 to 15 minutes each time? Is because the brain chemistry starts to balance naturally, because you're turning on the parasympathetic regularly, and you're expanding the mind out of the proverbial, in the analogy, the 8-inch plastic bucket part of our mind. What's the result of that? The result is more self-confidence, more self-esteem. One of our panelists talked about self-esteem issues earlier, right? More self-esteem, and also a greater sense of self-control. So some of our panelists talked about that earlier, the issue of, this is something I can control. I can meditate. I can actually have control over something internal in my life, as opposed to just popping a pill, that has all kinds of other side effects to it, et cetera, as we know. Okay. Brittany or Walker, you want to comment on, how long did it take and the coming and going of the anxiety issue? I think that somebody asked about in the chat box.
I was just going to say it's ironic because you have confidence that you can control the issue, but the means to it is all about doing the opposite of that.
Yes, exactly.
I would just add to what Jeremy was saying. He can tell him, he can repeat the mantra "let go" because his brain chemistry is balanced. He's done that foundational work. It can be dangerous to start telling yourself to let go if you are not meditating, because you can then you start beating yourself up. You start saying let go, and then you can't let go, and then you beat yourself up for not being able to let go. This is the whole thing that I was saying earlier about like why cognitive behavioral therapy, but that's a conscious process, and you can't use it if you're not able to think straight. So I would just say that it's you have to kind of put in the hours and trust that you're changing your brain chemistry for the better, and that one day, for me it took, I would say, again, I didn't notice like one day. There wasn't one specific moment, but I would say within 3 to 4 weeks, I started noticing a subtle change, and then that built on itself. Then I realized, ooh, that's kind of different. I have a kind of not so thinking obsessively. That made me feel even better, and then that just built on itself, like each little building block of progress then increased confidence that I do have the tool that's within me, and it just kind of grew from there, kind of blossomed outward.
Yeah,
That's what I wanted
learned
to
about
add.
2 years ago, Walker. I wrote that down when you and I first met, and I taught you to meditate. It was about 2 years. So somewhere in that period of time, it gradually dissipated, and so that's the thing. So people got to realize that doesn't necessarily look. I have had a 16-year-old high school student who was calling me from New York City when she got to high school at 6 in my morning. I said, Gemma, please don't call me at 6 in the morning. Then this before I put my phone on do not disturb, I knew that before I knew that it was a setting. Gemma, it's 6 in the morning here. She's calling me. She's freaking out at school about death and dying issues. 16 years old. Okay. She's the quickest one that I've ever seen. This is it's not as a normal an occurrence. It was 2 weeks. And I checked her and she said, yeah, I feel good. She first called me when she was with her mom and this and that. Anyway, that it takes longer than that usually, for it to completely go away, come and go for a while, for months for some people. And in some rare cases, I've had it last a year or longer, but it depends on the person. It depends on how consistent they are with the meditation, because if you're not consistent, then what happens is you start collecting more junk because you're not meditating regularly, and then you're not turning on the parasympathetic. That's what I tell my students. Don't think about it as meditation. Think about it as turning on your parasympathetic, your opposite of fight or flight. You got to think about it that way, because meditation, you think of it as a thing or a technique or a tool you got to do. It is a tool, but think of it more internally in terms of what you're doing in terms of your healthcare. You got to turn on your parasympathetic regularly. If you don't, then your sympathetic is overriding more. And that just means you're collecting more stuff. So that's why the consistency. I am a guilt-free guy, and people miss every once in a while, and it's fine. It's like, don't worry, don't beat yourself up about it. But there is a healthcare balance component to the consistency that you got to be aware of. Brittany, go ahead.
I started typing this, and then I was also trying to listen at the same time, and then I was typing incorrectly. But when I was in treatment, one of the things, and I think Jeremy even said this earlier, we would always say, trust the process, not trust the instant results, trust the process. And I know I validate so much when you're in that moment, how cliche that sounds. You're like, shut the up, trust the process, like kiss my ass. And especially when you're so desperate for an answer, like I remember being in the deeper throes of things and desperately searching in every direction, doctors, pastors, spiritually, like I wanted somebody to either have a magic pill or have a magic sentence, something that they could say that would make me feel better. And there was no magic pill and there was no magic sentence. And so then when you're like, okay, meditation, really, these are really deep fears and anxieties and thoughts, like this is going to help me. You have to give it a chance. You have to trust the process. And if you do, it just becomes, that's why it is so hard to pinpoint. I can tell you for sure within a few days, I felt better. And I can say, I know within a few weeks, it was significantly better. It's so hard to pinpoint exactly, but I think the foundation of any of it is just trusting the process.
Yeah. Thanks.
And eventually getting there.
Yeah, eventually. That's the thing, is eventually. When's eventually? Look, somebody mentioned hope at the, one of the panelists mentioned the word hope. And that's what a little bit of positivity will give you. And then you have hope, and then you continue with the process and so forth. So it's not like you got to wait, years and months and years before you feel, it's anything. No, but you notice, but when it actually goes away, at some point, Jeremy's kind of alluded to this. At some point, you kind of don't care if it's there, it's not there, because it's not overwhelming you anymore. That's the key. It's not consuming your awareness all day anymore. That's the key. We get these glimpses. And, and Christina mentioned, Christina's in South Africa, and I taught her to meditate. She said it's about 3 months now, I think she said. And she said, she said the meditation has given her hope that she can get through this anxiety she's referring to. After 3 months of working, with doing the meditation that I taught her, she says she has moments of peace, which is awesome. You see, the meditation definitely works. Thank you for again. So, the thing is, it's the moments of peace. You see, that's the thing. It's moments, and moments can then become minutes, and then become hours, and then become days, and so forth. But it's a gradual process, and each individual is unique. Everybody's unique. Everybody's life is different, and so forth, and how people process stuff is different, et cetera, et cetera. But I've been, I've helped thousands of people, and, thousands of people who've had really severe anxiety issues. I had one student of mine sleeping 36 hours a day. You may ask, how can you sleep 36 hours a day when there's 24 hours a day? Well, you sleep 24 plus 12, that's 36. And then you wake up at whatever time, and he was waking up, for an hour, maybe 2 on the high end hours, and then he'd sleep another 36. And this was going on for years. And, I won't mention his name, but, he lives in a Muslim country where his wife was supporting him. And if you know anything about that culture, the woman supporting him, it's like very shameful. It's not culturally accepted, let's just say. And so that adds the stress. And then, and he's trying to sit for an exam. He can't study for the exam. He's only awake an hour a day, an hour every 36 hours, whatever, and so gradually, so he was one of my most extreme cases. And it, we're working closely together. I taught him to meditate, and then we worked closely privately together. I continued working with him for about a year. And then gradually his sleeping, now he was only sleeping 9 or 10 hours and so forth. And then gradually coming back, but, I told him, just like, not to do it all at once, because that would have been cold turkeying, and he'd go through withdrawal, and, he wouldn't be able to handle that. So gradually got him back to about 9 or 10 hours of sleep. He studied, bottom line, happy ending. You know, he did well on the civil service exam, and he got highest level senior officer, finance officer in his country. And it's just 2 years ago. Now he's been working for like about 8 or 10 months now, or something, a year, maybe something like that. You know, not that long. I think it'll be a year this fall. And so everybody's different is my point. Most people are not that extreme, you know. I mean, he would call me all hours of the day and night because he was freaking out. He was having an anxiety attack, off and on, off and on, off and on, off and on. It went on for months, at least a year, you know. And then, you know, something shifted. It's a shift that occurs in our psycho-emotional and in our chemistry. It's both. Our body, yes, our body is not, you know, they influence each other. The body is not the mind. The mind is the mind, and the body is the body. But they influence each other, and that chemistry is important to shift. You know. So great, thank you. Anything else? Other questions, people?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have one. And
Yes.
it's Abby.
Hey, Abby.
Okay, really comfortable here. This has been a great panel. I heard about it from Greg, and I wanted to ask you guys. Guys talk about anxiety, and I've been meditating for what, 6 years? Is that right? 6 years? You taught me. Is that right?
Something
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
Maybe 5, 6. So you talk about the adrenaline, and I just wanted, and I was surprised that you guys brought it up, because if there's past traumas years and years ago, would a person then have to would a person feel it later, years after, to where they would have to, you know, feel like they have to get rid of it? I know even with the meditation, and I'm doing it twice a day, every day. Then after there's years later that you just feel like it's getting out of you. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you're totally making sense.
I'm
Abby.
not. I've talked to Greg about this.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yes, you're totally making sense, and the short answer is absolutely yes. It's the body stores stuff for a long time. Body stores a lot of stuff and a lot of emotional patterns. So it's hard to discern, like, where's the emotional pattern residing? Is it this chemistry issue here or there? We don't need to get into that. That's I don't think no psychologist, no psychiatrist, no psychotherapist, and no endocrinologist would be able to discern that either. Okay, it's a blurry line, but they definitely affect each other for sure. And the short answer to you is that yes, we can carry this stuff around for many decades and even 100, you could say, if you those people who believe in other lifetimes, for a long time. Okay, yes, we can carry this stuff around. But like you know, I mean, I won't. I'll just say something that, you know, that will inform other people about. But you know, your work life is very, let's just say, demanding. As a manager now, you've gotten promoted over these years we've been working together, and getting up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning every day, and then having these intense days that last all what other people's work day. You have a work day that lasts pretty much as long as other people who are waking up at 7 or 8 in the morning, and you're getting up at 3:30. That takes a toll, and you know that, and we've had this conversation, you know. But the short answer to your question is absolutely yes. You know, yeah, you can carry this stuff around from childhood, absolutely, and the adrenals can still be out of balance. We'll just call it balance issue. Okay. Yeah.
And one last question.
Mhm.
You know me very well. And when I'm around other meditators, there's this feeling of calmness whenever and whenever I get anxious, I get around Greg, and he just touches me and I feel very calm instantly. Is that I know he's been practicing, I don't know however long you've been practicing, but is that what can you explain to me what that is, what that feeling is? Because my anxiety goes now that I'm a meditator, I still feel very calm afterwards. But when I get around Greg, it is just and you and some other meditators that we both know that have been practicing for years. Why do I feel so calm immediately?
Yeah. So Greg, who she's referring to as her life partner, Greg, and I learned to meditate about the same time. Greg is the guy you guys have heard me talk about. He used to teach the professional athletes in the 1970s. He and another guy, Don, who would travel around the United States teaching professional athletes. So they taught the entire Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team. Greg taught Joe Namath to meditate. People in the US know who Joe Namath is, Hall of Fame quarterback, New York Jets. He taught the UNC Chapel Hill basketball team when James Worthy and Mitch Kupchak were there, and so forth, so on. Right before Michael Jordan arrived. So Greg and I have been meditating a long time. To answer your question, what happens after you've been meditating? Like, why do I continue meditating? So this kind of goes to why do you keep meditating? You got rid of your anxiety. You don't have anxiety anymore. You're way past the anxiety. I got rid of my anxiety, like, I don't know, 49 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever. I've been meditating for 51 years. So it took me a year or two. I don't know, something like that for me to get, but I was still physically tired. To your point, Abby, you asked, and I tell people this in my meditation class, so you guys, those of you who've taken it, you've heard me say this, I'm very transparent. I was still sleeping. My adrenals were still on overload for at least 3 years at least. When I was in graduate school, I was still passing out a lot, just sleeping, passing out, meaning sleeping, not passing out from drinking, but, sleeping, just falling asleep all the time. So my adrenal glands, Abby, you're talking about somebody who did not have a traumatic childhood. Me, no, I did not. I had a fairly quote unquote normal childhood and so forth and so on. Parents, the typical nuclear family and all that. But I was, so it took me a few years for my adrenal glands to really kind of get balanced, 3-4 years of meditating, right? Okay. So, but, was I better sooner? Like our panelists have said, yeah, I've noticed. Yeah. It wasn't, all of a sudden I was, all of a sudden better and I was just sleeping that whole time. No, I had great days and great weeks and great months. And then I fall asleep for a while because my adrenal glands were still catching up. All right. But to answer your question, once you've been meditating longer, your energy system changes. Your physiology is much more balanced. We are energy systems. This is the reality. We are a physical body and we are an energy system within the physical body. That's what our mind is. Our mind is an energy system. Yeah, you could say brain waves and all that stuff. I get it, okay? And that's real. But we are an energy system. Our mind is energy. And so you shift and you balance out that energy system, which is really who we are. I think Jeremy was talking about, who am I? He raised the issue, am I my anxiety? Not only are you not your anxiety, we are the experiencer of all our experiences. That's who we are. We are our consciousness, our mind. And if you want to talk about it scientifically, you can look at it and just talk about it as brain. That's okay. I'm okay with that. That's fine. But we are that. That's really who we are. We are not our thoughts and emotions. But when we're in the middle of the anxiety, we get swept away by that. But to your point, Greg and I have been meditating for 50 years now. So you don't have to be meditating 50 years. You've been with other people who've been meditating for, 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. Less than 50 years is my point. You can feel the difference in somebody who's been meditating for regularly, consistently for a number of years. Their vibe is different. What's vibe? Vibe is energy. Energy is who we are. They're more balanced. And when you're with Greg and you just in his physical presence, you feel that and it just calms you down. That's why I meditate so frequently with my high anxiety students, to get them past that. It helps meditating with me more regularly. And I don't charge extra for that. It's just all part of my work that I do to help people. It all works out in the end as far as I'm concerned. That's what I do to help people get over these spikes, I call them, period in their life. Does that answer your question, Abby?
Yeah.
Good question, though. Thank you. Anything else before we call it a session? Yeah, Elaine?
Can I say something?
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank everybody. I think a discussion like this is so important because there, as you said, Kelvin, there's millions of people walking around feeling this way. And I think you feel alone. You think there's something terribly wrong with you because you're feeling this way. And basically what you do, you feel like you're only surviving. And, but Jeremy and Walker and Brittany, thank you for your vulnerability of expressing and telling your story. And if you keep doing this, the people that you're helping is, because they can connect with how with your experiences. And Kelvin, I hope these discussions keep going on because we need it. We really do. And it's a reminder to me every day of the commitment to do the meditation and why I'm doing it. Because some days you kind of think, oh, is it really working? Yeah, it is. But I need the reminder. So these discussions are really important. I just want to thank everybody for this discussion. And thank you, Kelvin, for who you are and what you do. I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thanks for the comment, Elaine.
Thanks,
Maggie,
Elaine.
did you want to say something, Maggie? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to share a little bit of my experience and my husband. We learned the meditation technique with Kelvin about 22 years ago, I think, or probably even more.
Yeah.
And we were not like in a desperate place or anything, but we just felt like we needed something to help us be more balanced in general and all. And also we were trying to get pregnant and it wasn't happening. So this is one of the things that we wanted to work on. We were very fortunate to be at Whole Foods one day and there was this sign where, Kelvin was going to have an introductory kind of lecture. And so we signed up and we did it. And ever since we have done it for a period of time, then kind of you get into your busy life and forget about it, but then you remember it really makes you feel better because you're starting to feel it wear off. But basically, what I wanted to mention is that we did have 2 kids eventually, and our first child is now 18, and he was a meditation baby for sure. I mean, I meditated through my entire pregnancy twice a day and the whole thing. And he's been, for the most part, like a calm person and very, considerate. And he's really a very sweet young man now. Coming from this kind of background that I think he was, again, not too much of a problematic upbringing or a childhood, still before COVID even, he started asking for help because he was feeling like he he just needed some support. He didn't know how to deal with things he was experiencing. So we looked for help, and unfortunately, I wasn't told it was going to be only 12 sessions through our insurance. So by the time he was starting to get warmed up, it was over, and we were handed a phone number, not even a referral to a person that could probably help him with the work he had already done with the previous person to refer us to the right help, right? So we were kind of, okay, now what? And he gradually had started feeling a little better, so that was okay. But then just recently after COVID, where it started getting worse, like every time he was going to leave the house, he'd get in the car and immediately he'd start feeling nauseous. And this has been going on. Still today, it happens occasionally, but a little less. And what was it, about 2-3 months ago, Kel, that we reached out to you and we asked if he could help, right? If Kel could help him, because our son was going to have a reunion that he had organized, and it was a lot of people, and he was so excited about it, but he was so afraid of having a breakdown and an anxiety attack and all this. So amongst other things, he wanted to finally, he accepted that this was probably something good for him. And we talked to Kel, and Kel offered to have a conversation. They did it, and our son started doing it, and he did very well, and he has been doing better in general. But I noticed that when he had a focus on these 2 particular events that he wanted to be well for, it was great. It worked, and he was fine. And after that, he came back to that kind of skeptical, kind of like, yeah, it works, but it's not as good as you think. And recently he went on a trip, and during the trip, and I don't know, Kel, if you know this, but he had a few anxiety episodes while he was with his best friend and his mom, and this during his vacation. He had to be driven back to the house because he couldn't bear the emotion, the excitement of visiting something he was interested in. And not to bore you with this any longer, because I know it's probably a lot of information, but my main question, and the reason I wanted to bring this up, is thank you, first of all, to all of you, because this has been amazing for me as a mother to know that there is hope in something I really don't understand myself, because I've never experienced it. So not that I don't feel empathy and all, but I can't really relate at that level. But my question to you here is like, is there something you think, because I don't want him to have to hit rock bottom for him. He's mentioned the meds, but not because he wants them, but he has friends who have taken them, and he thinks they're working for them. But obviously he knows that he doesn't want this if he can avoid it, but he's not 100% convinced, or he hasn't been in that place where he realizes if he doesn't help himself, nobody can do it for him. And my question was really like, do you think there's anything that would help him understand without having to get to that place?
Well, so the first thing, Maggie, is and this goes to anybody, is you need to contact me, because this is the first time I've heard of this. So he has not been responsive to my text to him. So, you need to reach out to me. And because if he's not consistent in the practice, like we said, that's when all the fight or flight start to kick in. And I don't know, because I'm not with him, obviously, or any of my students, how regularly and consistently are they practicing? I know that if somebody is consistent in their practice, I know what happens. I know the positive trajectory. I can't meditate for somebody, and so they got to do it themselves. Now, you can't force him to do it, but if he wants help, first of all, the person has to want help.
Right.
That's the thing. And you and I had this conversation before I taught him to meditate, and we said he needs to want to do it. I do not teach children whose parents contact me and say, I want you to teach the kid. I will only teach, whether it's the child or whether it's their sister or brother or anybody, unless they want to do it. They want the help. And because otherwise it's a waste of their time and my time. I'm here to help people who want to be helped. So you got to reach back to me and say, okay, and see if I can have a conversation with him or whatever. Now, the meditation consistency is critical, because if you're not consistent, then, you're not going to get the benefits. We know that, right?
Mhm.
You have to close your eyes and you have to meditate. Now, these other panelists I don't know when you joined the call, but they spoke very openly about some of the, we'll just call it, undesirable effects of medication. Jeremy said in the first session, this is the second time we've done this, and you can go on YouTube and you can listen to.
No, sorry, I did listen to the first one partly, but then I had to go because I was at work.
Yeah.
I
But I was
listened.
just going to say that Jeremy talked about, he didn't say this in this session, but he said this in the first session, where he said how he's probably done prescribed 90% of all the psychotropic drugs out there.
Right.
He's been through that. And then, and the other panelists have gone through, to some extent as well.
Mhm.
So if you're asking that, that's something that they could talk about, not me. But the solution from my standpoint with Marco is for him to get in touch with me and let me know what's going on. And then I can work with him and I'll meditate with him. You know what I do. I mean, for those of you who don't know me, I meditate with people as frequently as necessary for as long as it takes to get them past the anxiety spikes that they're having. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't charge extra for that.
And yeah, I last time when the first panel happened, he was traveling back from that trip I was talking about, and today he couldn't make it either. And I want him to listen, because each one of the stories I heard, I think, would be so helpful to him. And I really appreciate it, again, that you're sharing this, because I think this could be preventive for him to not have to get there to come out of it, but
he might have to. I was just going to say he might have to. That's just the unfortunate reality. I think that what your question, it hits on so many important things. I think this is really about you. I think that know that he has had a glimpse of it and trust that he will make contact with Kel when he is ready. For you, I think this is it's about letting go. It's about letting go of what you can't control, whether he wants to do this for himself or when or if or when. You know what I mean? So I don't know, Kel, if you think that there's anything that she could say, but the minute that he starts to feel pushed or feels like meditating has become a should,
Yes,
it is going to, he'll go running in the opposite direction. So
exactly. First thing I said to my wife when we taught our kids when they were 4 and 5 years old. And I didn't have to say it to my wife because we were on the same page, which was, we never ever asked our kids if they meditated. We did not ask our kids. And we never said, you really need to meditate, or you should go meditate now. You're not acting, you're angry or whatever. No, we never did that with our kids. And now my kids meditate regularly because they have a good attitude towards it. And it's their tool. It's their tool. So Maggie, you remember we had this conversation, but it's great for you to hear it from Walker, who I did not plant here to say that.
right. No, and I did, well, when he agreed to do it, that's the way it was presented. You're going to college now and you're going to be on your own. You need to just learn and have this as a tool in your box so that you can use it if you need it. So I'm confident that if he feels but yeah, he'll probably, like Walker said, have to feel maybe more desperate or have a goal in mind, like he had those events. Now it's just normal life again. So he doesn't feel he's working towards anything in particular. He's using it as a Band-Aid, as Kelvin said, not
Right.
so much as a vitamin to keep you or to keep you healthy just in general. So yeah, I guess I just have to step back and let him find it out himself. And he has asked for help even after this. And I'm like, what's happening with the meditation? Well, yeah, but that's not enough, you know? So I don't know if it's influence from his friends who are on those other paths that have been medicated and stuff, that he, even though he says he doesn't want to, I don't know if that's what he's asking for, but I really would prefer to avoid it if possible. But I guess I just need to step back, right?
I'm
Let
gonna
him.
hop in really quick as a
go
fellow
ahead.
parent here.
Go ahead,
Mom of four, just went through something with my daughter. You know, I think, yes, I think this is part of your journey in this, and this is just opinion, obviously. Part of your journey in this is letting go.
Mhm.
That's part of your part of this journey. And his part is, because even if you present it to him as an option, like with my daughter and what she and I went through recently, it had to be her idea. I was presenting it to her like, hey, you don't have to, but it was still my idea.
Right.
You know, he's got to come to it, I think, on his own. If, you know, the more you politely suggest, I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think you're right. And I think I'm realizing what I need to do, which is nothing.
Hardest thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Jeremy, anything? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's tough. You know, like one of like the biggest catalysts for me with deciding to take charge and handle things myself was realizing that I had a daughter, and if she came to me one day and asked me what to do, that I needed to have an answer, right? Because I had gone through what she had gone through. So I'm not saying that you can have an answer because you haven't gone, it doesn't sound like, at least, that you've had the issues. It's going to be hard for him to hear it from anybody else that hasn't been there. I think that's why I think like people on this panel resonate, because we've walked through the fire. So I think he's going to need, and I would be happy to talk to him if that is an option that he wants, but again, it can't be something that's forced on him like everybody else said. And I'm sure anybody else on this panel would too. I can't speak for anybody else. I just assume that. So if I'm wrong, sorry. But there's also a certain part of like, we all have stories that we tell ourselves in our head and we believe them. And right now he believes that meditation doesn't work. He hasn't done the work for it to work, but he's using that as evidence as to why it doesn't. And I don't think that's something that somebody else can change in his mind, unfortunately.
Right.
If my daughter came to me and she asked me how I dealt with anxiety, I can give her the tools, but I can't make her do the work. And that's my biggest struggle, just personally, with trying to help people, is if the unfortunate thing with anxiety is everybody would like to take some pill that makes stuff go away. And I think most people have tried that. The reason that they don't do it anymore is not because they didn't want that to be the solution. It's because it wasn't. You know, if I had a heart murmur and the doctor gave me something for it and I took it and it made it better, I wouldn't be like totally against that, right? Like, that's a deeper conversation, but it's because it doesn't work is the reason that we're all saying don't do it, not because we want you to take our path. It's the, you know, so if my daughter came to me and she didn't want to do the things that I asked her to do, that would be a really hard thing for me to accept. And my heart pours out to you. Even my mom, before she passed, had some anxiety issues and I didn't know how to help her. And if I would have, she wouldn't have listened anyways, because that's just how she was. And that's a tough thing to do. So my thing is just kind of showing you some love and saying, you know, let go of it and let go in a healthy way. Like, you can't ignore it. You're going to love him forever, and just trust in the fact that he'll find it. And, you know, maybe just try to point him towards some people that have been through it that can maybe give him a unique perspective on it, that other people that haven't been through it aren't able to give.
Yeah. So, because his memory is selective. And like everybody's memory is selective.
Yeah.
Because his memory, because he felt much better.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
He did so well for those two events.
I think
that we had.
I think he's also looking at it, like Kelvin said, with a drive-through permanent philosophy. Like if I quit meditating right now, 6
Right.
months from now, I'm going to feel like crap.
Right.
Right. Because my body is kind of wired that this is something that I do that's part of my life. And I have to understand that it's something I reward myself with because I deserve it and I love myself and I want to feel good and I want to show up right for my daughter and my wife and the people in my life. It's not something that I do for X amount of days and then it goes away and I can go back to all the other bad habits I had that led to this in the first place.
Mhm.
Right. So we have to take responsibility, and that's something that you can't make somebody do. Like my thing is, I said this on the last call, but there's a phrase that I like. It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility.
Right.
No, it's not the doctor's in my world. It's not the doctor's responsibility. It's not my wife's responsibility. It's not Pfizer's responsibility. It's nobody's responsibility but mine. It's not my fault. I don't blame myself. I don't look in the mirror and say this is your fault. But I do say the only person that's going to get me out of this when I'm low is me. I'm the only one that can. And he's going to have to get to that point. He's looking for something that is because he doesn't want to take responsibility for it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. We just live in a society where we don't take responsibility for a lot of things.
Mhm.
If he doesn't take responsibility for it, he's not going to do the work that's necessary for it. And he's going to look back and say, see, that thing didn't work either. So I'm going to go look for something else because it's not me. It's something else. So I'm going to go figure out what's going to solve this problem.
I didn't start taking responsibility for my own misery until I was 30. So
Yeah.
that's not meant to depress you. It's just, maybe gives some perspective. And another thing to give you perspective is to remember that he did come to you.
Mhm.
And that he did it, yes, he did it short term and it had a positive effect. But the most important thing is that he came to you and he will come to you again. You should feel really good about that.
Right.
That he loves and trusts you enough to come to you at all, and know that he will come to you again when he's ready.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a huge point. Just as a mom, I resonate so much with that, Walker, because, I have friends who, you're right. Like there are kids who won't come to you at all. And that's huge. The fact that he came at all.
Mhm.
Right. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. No, he's a good kid.
He is, yes.
He is a good soul and he's trying to find himself and he's 18 years old. And, and that's, that's a tough age for male, female, anybody. 18 to 20, 21, 22 years old.
Right.
I have a lot of students in that age range, and it's a very difficult age to navigate. Judgment is still being developed from a cortex, just a physical brain standpoint.
Mhm.
And independence is being developed all at the same time. That's all part of the human development process at that age. And sometimes the two don't go together well, So the independence and the development of judgment. So, sometimes, to use a phrase, we all have to skin our knees sometimes before we realize that maybe, what we were doing was causing us to skin our knees. And so we'll see how that goes. But I think the advice from our panelists is appropriate in this case.
It is. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for being transparent and bringing that up, Maggie. I'm sure it'll help other people who are listening to this. Anything else? Other questions? Anything? Great. So really good discussion today. Thanks so much to our panelists for being so transparent and open, and for the questions from our audience and so forth. People want to reach out to me, just Google my name. That's probably the easiest thing to do. I have 4 websites, and the meditation one is called turningwithin.org. On the bottom of any page are links to the other 3 websites, and I help people, as we said earlier, specifically with overcoming the fear of death, but also any anxieties as well. It really doesn't matter. I help people regardless get over their fears and anxieties. And reach out to me from around the world. You can reach out to me anytime. I made a joke about not calling me at 6 a.m. earlier, but I do know how to turn on my do not disturb button now. Excuse me. So you can text and email me and call me whenever, and I won't wake me up from various time zones around the world. But thank you again so much for everybody being on, especially the 3 panelists. And I really think this will help a lot of people who've been going through these difficult moments in their lives for various reasons. And we'll do this again another time. But thank you for all for being here, and be safe. And you know how to reach me. And if you need to reach out to any of the panelists, just feel free to reach to me first. And that'll probably be the easiest thing to do. Okay, take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.